Join as we learn for Sunday Parshas Vayakhel. Generally, on a non-leap year, Vayakhel and Pekudei are read together. On a leap year, Vayakhel and Pekudei are read separately. The Torah reading thus now has told us about the laws, how God told Moses about the building of the tabernacle. We read about the sin of the golden calf. And now we are at that point where Moses comes down after he asks God for atonement of the Jewish people, and the Jewish people are forgiven. And the day after Yom Kippur, he gathers the Jewish people to tell them about the construction of the tabernacle. Chapter 35, verse 1. Vayakhel Moshe kol hadas bnei Yisrael. Moshe gathers the entire congregation of Israelites, Vayomer aleim, and he tells them, Eila hadvarim asher tziva Hashem lasi seisam. These are the things that God has commanded for you to do. Vayakhel Moshe, Rashi tells us, when did this occur? L'macharas Yom Kippurim, the day after Yom Kippur, k'sheyarad min hahar, when he came down the mountain, hu loshin hifil she'ena oisav anashim b'yadayim ala im nasim al pidiburi. Vayakhel means that they gathered together, meaning it happened because it wasn't that he collected the people with his hands, it was because he said they should all come together. He was the cause for them to gather. V'targumi ve'achnish, and therefore the Targum, the Aramaic translation of the Unkla, says, and he gathered, not uknesh, and they ve'achnish, and they gathered uknesh, and he gathered. Verse 2. Sheishes yamim te'asa melacha. For 6 days you should work should be done. And the 7th day should be considered holy. Shabbos Shabbosain, a holy of holies, a complete rest. L'Hashem, unto God, whoever does any work, Yumas shall be put to death. Rashi, Sheishes Yamim, Hiktim Lahem Asara Shabbos L'Tzivim Melechas HaMishkan. He prefaced the laws pertaining to the Shabbos before telling them about the construction of the tabernacle. Loimar, to tell them, Eina Deichas HaShabbos, that the building of the tabernacle does not supersede the Shabbos. The Shabbos is to be observed, and on Shabbos they will not work and will not be building the tabernacle. If you look at the words that the Torah mentions here, Sheishes Yamim, 6 days a week, not you shall work, but work will be done. Over here the Torah tells us that a person observes Shabbos. Chassidus explains that when a person observes Shabbos, the Shabbos blesses the upcoming week, that the 6 days, automatically the work is done for them. A person also has to remember that when a person works during these 6 days of the week, he has to remind himself and remember that it's the God's blessing that gives him the ability to achieve and to prosper, and therefore only his hands should be the working. With the work of one's hands, that he's able to bring home the sustenance that he needs, and shall leave his head space for godly matters, and this way the blessing of God will be in what he does. The Torah then continues with the prohibition of one should not kindle any fire in your dwelling place on Shabbos, b'yoyim haShabbos, on the day of Shabbos. Rashi, why does the Torah single out this prohibition? There are those of the rabbis that explain that the reason why the Torah singles out this commandment of the 39 principal laws is because it's said here differently, that in this case, for kindling a fire, one does not get the punishment of death, but only the punishment of lashes. However, others explain that it actually came to separate them, telling us that there were 39 categories of work, and if one was to transgress any of them or several of them inadvertently, you need to atone for each one separately. Just like the kindling of a fire is an individual prohibition, so too any of the prohibitions are individuals, and one is liable for them individually. Now the Torah goes on as Moshe tells the Jewish people about the items that are needed to build the tabernacle. Verse 4. Moshe can tells all the Jewish people, Leimer, saying, this is what God has commanded me to tell you. Why does he say twice that this is what Moshe says in saying? Li Leimer, he told it to me that I should be able to pass it on to you. Verse 5, take from them Truma Hashem, a donation for God. Any person who has a generous heart should contribute as Truma Hashem, the donation for God. Zav, a kesef, and a cheshes, gold, silver, and copper. Rashi Nediv Libai, What does this mean? Because when a person has the generosity to give, it comes from the heart, and therefore he calls it the generosity of the heart. Now, Rashi over here gives us a general rule that he will not repeat things that are unnecessary. Therefore, he says, you will notice that Rashi over here will not be that much, because he says, I have already explained the details of the building of the tabernacle, and over here it's just a review of what Moshe tells it to the Jewish people, and therefore see earlier to its details and particulars. Verse 6. The other items being donated was turquoise wool, purple dyed wool, tela shani, scarlet wool, linen, and goat's hair. Verse 7, Vaydas elim adamim, red dyed ram skin, Vaydas tchashim, tachash skin, vatzei shitim, and acacia wood. Shemen lamoyer, oil for illuminating, samim l'shemen hamishcha, and incense for the oil of anointing, v'liktoides asamim, and for the incense offering. Verse 9, Avnei shoyim, avnei meluyim, the onyx stones and the incense stones, the ephod v'lacheshim, for the ephod and for the breastplate. Verse 10, the chol chacham leiv bachem, and all the intelligent, smart people, wise-hearted individuals, shall come forward. Yavoyu v'yasu kol archiva Hashem, will come and do as God commanded. Verse 11, es hamishkan es oloi, the tapestries of the tabernacle, es oloi, and its cover, ves michzeu, and the cover that went on top of that, ves kroshav and its clasps, ves kroshav and its planks, es brichov and its crossbars, es amudav and its pillars, ves adanav and the sockets. Over here you notice it says, Es HaMishkan, the tabernacle. What's the tabernacle? Wasn't the entire structure called the tabernacle? So Rashi explains, the underlying, the one that was beneath the tapestries that were on the bottom, that you saw from inside the tabernacle, those are called the tabernacle. Es Oloi, the tent covering, that was the goat skin covering, which was made as a roof, and then the cover on top of that was that was the rams and the tachar skin that went all the way on the top. Verse 12, the ark, Vesbadov and its poles, Esakapoidis its cover, Espareches hamasach, and the partition curtain. Espareches hamasach, Pareches hamechitza. This was the curtain that separated between the Holy of Holies and the Holy. Kol davar hamegin bein milmayla bein keneged nikari masach uschach. Anything that separates, whether on the side or whether on top of it, is called masach, or as we know by a sukkah, it's called schach. So too we find in the verses in Iyov, sachta ba'adoi, or we also find in Oshay, hine sach es darkech, that I will close off your way, using the terminology as a divider from the word sach, schach, or masach. Verse 13. As a shulchan ve'ezbad of the table and its poles, as kol kelev and all the utensils that came with it, ve'eis lechem apanim and the showbread. Why was it called showbread? Karpirashti, Rashi says, I explained previously in chapter 25, al shem shoyele panim lekano lekan, because it was facing one another like a sea. Shoy also kamin teva, was made like a box, aprutza, an open box, and therefore you had the two ends facing one another, so it was called facing the showbread. Verse 14, Vesmenoidas amoyer, and the candelabra for kindling, Veskela and its utensils, Vesneresa and its lamps, Veshemen amoyer, and the oil for kindling. Neresa, Ebezichim shashem vapsilun nusamim. These were the lamps that the oil and the wicks were put in it. Veshemen amoyer, and the light for illumination. What was it so important that you needed intellectual, smart, talented people to make oil? This was because the oil for illuminating, as we explained previously, had to be made in a specific way. Needed special people because this was made differently than any other type of oil, and this needed a special talent to be able to do this. Like it's explained in Menachos 86a, that they would take the ones that were on top of the olive tree, and they would have to take from the best ones, and then kosis, then press it, v'zach, that it would have to be pure without any sediment. Verse 15. V'es mizbech hakteris, and the altar for the incense offering, vesbadav and its poles, Hashem and Hamishcha, and the oil for anointing, veskteris hasamim, and the incense for offering, vesmasach hapesach lepesach hamishkan, and the entranceway for the entrance of the tabernacle. Masach hapesach, that's a vilin, that was a curtain, shalifnei hamizrach, which was on the east side. Shalai hayu shem krashim v'lo yediyas, there was no beams or skin there, or any of the tapestries, and it was only a curtain that blocked the entrance of the tabernacle. Verse 17. Eskali achotzer, the curtains that were needed for the courtyard, asamud of its pillars, asadana, its sockets, its mosach shara chaser, and as well as the opening of the courtyard. As mosach shara chaser, vilum parish, there was a curtain that was hanging on the east side, eser mama 20 amas, it was the on center of the width of the courtyard, because the width of the courtyard was 50 amos. You had 15 on each side, made it 30, 20 center opening, and that was covered by a curtain. And there was 15 to the north and the south, as we learned previously in chapter 27, that there were 15 for each side, 15 cubits on each side. Verse 18, as Yistes HaMishkan, Ves Yistes HaChater, it was the pegs for the tabernacle, the pegs for the courtyard, Ves Misreim, and their tying ropes. Why were there pegs? So Rashi explains, Yistes, these pegs, they took the big tapestries that were hanging, they would tie it down to the bottom, so therefore they would not blow in the wind. These were ropes that were used to keep them down. Verse 19, as Bigdei Esrod, there was netted packing blankets, packing cloths, l'shadis b'kodesh, that was used with the holy items, as Bigdei HaKodesh, the holy garments, la'aron HaKohen, for Aaron the Kohen, as Bigdei Banav l'chayin, and the children's garments as well, his son's garments that was used for priesthood, for the Kohanim. Rashi, Bigdei Esrod, l'chasis as Aaron, these were used to cover they were moving blankets that were used to cover the Ark of the Covenant, as well as the table and the menorah and the altars, b'shasilik masois, when they would travel on. Verse 20, Vayetzu kol hadas b'nei Yisrael b'lifnei Moshe, and the entire congregation of the Israelites then left Moshe's presence. On a leap year, this would end the first section. On a leap year, we continue now with the second section of 4 Sundays, Parshas Vayakhel and Pekudei together. Verse 21, Vayevoyu kol ish asher nesoya libay, and any person and all people came, everyone who had a generous spirit, and whoever wanted to make that his spirit said, I want to contribute to God. These individuals all brought their donation to God for the work of the tent of meeting, and anything that it was needed in service, and for the garments. Verse 22, and the men accompanied the women, all generous individuals with a heart, they brought chach v'nezem, they brought bracelets and nose and rings, v'tabas and finger rings, v'kumas and other rings as well, v'kol klizav, all types of gold garments, v'kol isha sharhenif tnufas zazav l'Hashem, and any person who brought a donation to God. Rashi explains what these items were. Al hanashim. First of all, he says al hanashim. Im hanashim smuchim doesn't mean they were on top of them, but they came accompanying them. Choch is a bracelet. Tachshit shel zav ogel nasan al zrevu hatzamid. It is a round type of jewelry which is put on the wrist, and this is called a bracelet. The word chumaz is klei zav. This was a golden piece of jewelry. Nasan keneged eisa makam leisha was put by the private parts of the woman. The rabbis explain that if you look at the word kumaz, alludes to it because the word kumaz is an acronym of the word kan and makoim zima. Here is a place of immorality. Verse 23. V'chol isha sharnimta itay, any person that had with him tchelis vargamam v'selah shani, turquoise wool, purple wool, or scarlet red wool, v'sheish or linen, v'izim or goat's hair, v'oyres elam adamim or ram's skin dyed red, v'oyres tchashim or tachar skin, heviyu, they brought it as well. What does it mean they hold at hand? Why does he use the terminology itoy? It should say itam, with them. When the Torah says itoy, it's referring to that any person that had any one of these kinds, whether it was turquoise, purple, or scarlet wool, or any of these things, kulam eviu, they all brought it, meaning what the person had. It could be a person had some of them, a person only had one of them. Anything that the individual had, they brought as well. Verse 24, Kol meidim trumas kesef and achoshes, any person that brought a donation of silver or copper, heviu as trumas Hashem, contributed towards the donation of God. V'chol asher nimtza itoy, and any person who had with him atzei shitim, acacia wood, For all the work of the service that was needed, they brought it as well. Verse 25, and all the women who had this skill, that they were able to, that with their hands they were able to spin the different materials. They brought then the spun yarn, and this spun yarn had in it all the different material of tchelas, the Turkish wool, argama, the purple wool, tilashani, the scarlet wool, vasashesh, and the linen, all were spun together. Verse 26. As in all the women whose hearts inspired them as well. Tavu Sa'izim had the ability to spin the goat's hair. The goat's hair to spin was an extra special talent, that they had to do it directly off the living animals into threads, and that required a very special skill, as Rashi says. This was a special skill. They would do it right off the goat's hair, right off the goat's back, and this was done that the goat's hair does not get dirty, and this was the cleanest and purest wool that could be used. Verse 27. And the leaders of the tribes brought the onyx stones, and the insert stones, for the breastplate, for the ephod and the breastplate. Rashi says, why does it tell us about the Nesiim, the leaders, that they only brought it at the end? Rabbi Nassan said, why would you find, when it came to the dedication and inauguration of the tabernacle, the first ones to bring the sacrifices were the leaders? This was when it comes to the building of the tabernacle, you only see their name later. This is what the leader said. Let everybody bring what's needed, and whatever is missing, we will then supplement. However, as we're going to see, as we'll see in the next Torah reading, that everybody brought so much to the extent that they told Moshe that it was more than enough. So the leader said, what are we going to do? What are we going to bring? We have nothing left for us. Therefore, they had the opportunity to bring these special stones. Because, therefore, when it came to the inauguration, they saw they missed out on the building of the tabernacle, that they were late. So, therefore, when it came to the inauguration, they were there first. Because they were lax at the beginning in contributing. Therefore, if you look at the word of Ahanasiyim here, there are no yuds. Generally, a chirik replaces a yud, or a yud replaces a chirik, I should say. And over here, we don't have any of those yuds, and that is because they were lax when it came to contributing to the building of the tabernacle. Verse 28, and as well as the spice and the oil for illumination, lamoyer to illuminate, l'shem and abishchem for the anointing oil, v'likteir sasamim, and for the incense offering. Verse 29, kol ish v'isha sharnadav libam, any man and woman that was very generous from his heart. Oisam, they themselves, lahavil kol malacha, brought to all the work and that was needed in the holy temple. Asher tziva Hashem lasis, that God commanded to do. Biyad Moshe, in the hands of Moshe. Eviu b'nei Yisrael nedav Hashem, all the Jewish people generously contributed towards this building of the tabernacle. This concludes the Torah reading for Parshas Vayakhel.